My career background I can give you, since we're waiting for a laptop, I take this opportunity to pretty much give you everything I can. My professional background is occupational health. I'm currently the Director of Occupational Health Services at the University of Fraser Valley in Abbotsford. I've been involved in post-secondary university administration for about 8 years. My educational background is associates in occupational health, bachelor's level in business admin, and a master's in organizational leadership. So that's kind of like my career projection up till now. I don't know, but that's where I am right now. My personal background, I've had a lot of opportunity through my family, I think, to experience various aspects of the punk. And my interest in post-1978, post-84, up until the present day has been mainly carved out by my family and family connections and people that I've interacted with over the last 20 years of my life, I would say. So I guess until this thing starts, I'll give you the full background. Up until the age of 15, I grew up in a small town, Clearwater, BC, up north. It's about 5 hours from here. There's about 2,500 people that live in that town. We were the only Gostik that lived there. Up until the age of 15, I was bullied heavily because of my case. And my distad, I had my distad pulled off, thrown in the garbage can, once it was thrown in the toilet. So I went through a probably significant period of my life where at around 15 years old I actually turned away from Sikhi completely. I didn't cut my hair. I've never drank in my life. I didn't turn towards drugs. I actually did something else. I actually turned towards communism and atheism, and then just believing that there is nothing. And I went down that road for about 4 or 5 years. And it was mainly out of hate of identity. When I got to 14, 15 years old, I was heavily working out, martial arts, and then I became quite violent, I would say, for about 4 or 5 years. Mainly backlash at the people that were picking on me. It was time to get back at them, and I went through that for 4 or 5 years. In that period, my taya is Bhai Singh Bagri. That's the family connection that I have to Khalsa and to the Sikh month. Was mainly through him I came back to Sikhi. And the main reason was that I didn't understand Sikhi, nor did I understand Gurbani. I knew how to read it, I knew how to say it over and over again, but it didn't apply to me, nor did I know how to make it apply to me on a day-to-day level. And that's where my problem existed with Sikhi, was that the only interaction I had with Sikhi was negative. And that negative aspect was my loop, the way I looked, and to me the exact problem was just that the way I looked was what was defining me. Joe, do you mind?
Don't they have a laptop here? We can grab the desk.
Alright, keep going for a little while, I guess. Give you a little bit more.
Just grab the thing.
So, the reason I turned back to Sikhi actually was with my father-in-law, my taya Bhai Singh Bagri, my father-in-law, Bhai Singh,
Try taking that.
were two of the founders of Khalsa with Bhai Moninder Singh here in BC when the initial Jathebandi was started. My father and my taya and my father-in-law were all friends since before I was born, and they traveled back to Punjab in 1980, 81, and there my taya and father-in-law, future father-in-law, met Baba Janal Singh, and they met Baba Nihal Singh, and they formed that relationship, and they were met by Vadawa Singh, by Sulakhan Singh, by Manok Singh, and there's an initial picture of like by Bukhan Singh and some of the other Singhs there. You see there by Tirundar Singh in the middle, and there's all these things, the Yatra to Hajur Sahib. And those are the things that kind of were always with me, but from the rebellion and the revolution side. I didn't understand these people's jivani, I didn't understand how they existed as individuals, I didn't know what they were as human beings, nor did it really matter to me during those middle years, because I was actually on a path of, I would call it destruction of myself. And really it was because I had no idea how to apply Sikhi today. And one of the things that brought me back was my taya. And it was actually through just biyad at the end of the day. It wasn't through force. They figured they couldn't force me anymore. I was 18, 19 years old at the time. But he actually gave me, interesting enough, jail chittiyan by Ranveer Singh, and a little bit of a background of his life with Baba Janal Singh and his Sangharsh time in Pakistan and what he had done. And I was always more physical than I was spiritual, obviously growing up, because I didn't have any foundation. And the physical only, I figured out, stays with you. That Sipai side only stays with you as long as you have some grounding on the Santa side, and that you actually have Gurbani with you. So that actually started drawing me back. And then I did come back, and then I was very confused when I came back as to how Sikhi fit into the world, today. And then using 1984 as an inspiration rather than a period of sorrow, it was the main mission that I kind of took on when I came back. And Japnam Singh was talking about one of the first camps. I was 19 at the time, and I had barely any understanding, I would say, of the issue, and I think I barely have any understanding of the issues today. As we sit here in a Sangatru, I can give you information, and it's nothing more than any of you may already know, and it may be no different than what you already think. But when there's about 80, 90 collective minds together over a week in a concentrated area, there's a lot of good things that come out of it. Whether you inspire each other when leaving here, or whether you take something away that I've said or somebody else has said at this camp, that's kind of the main focus. Once we start going through the actual presentation, if it ever loads up, it's slides of kind of like a historical aspect. So I'll give you kind of an intro to. It's good. There's an intro to the actual presentation. So the presentation is actually a reflection on 1984. The first 8 to 10 slides are just actually pictures of in and around 1984 and that period. The second phase of it actually is a historical response. And the reason I use the title Redefining Justice is because I actually want, by the end of the presentation, at least some thought given to what is it that we're demanding and what is it that we actually want. Defining justice is something that the sponsor should have done a long time ago. And whether it's like some type of judicial justice or restorative justice or political justice in the form of an independent state, whatever that is that it should be very clear in our minds what it is that we're working towards. From a political aspect, how we infiltrate our religious aspect, our dharmic aspect into that political movement, that is up to us as a panth, and no individual can decide that. And what I want every individual to leave that presentation with is getting an idea of how you reflect on 1984, a historical response as to when has this happened with the Panth before, how many 1984s have we had in the past, and how have we responded immediately in the aftermath. And that comes all the way up to like 1978 with Bhai Fauja Singh. It goes right to the Vada Kalukara and the Shode Kalukare. It goes back to Lakhpat Rai and like the Shaheed Ganj of like 3,006 being executed. We'll go through a trajectory of where we ended up in 1984 and why this type of behavior exists with the Sikh Panth and why it will continue to happen with the Khalsa Panth and the Sikh Panth going forward. So this is not something that we can ever avoid, we never have, and nor do we look to avoid confrontation, nor do we look to actually sell out any ethical or moral values to actually protect ourselves, and then we'll get an idea for that. The third part of it is actually redefining justice. And we take a look at what we think justice is, how we've delivered justice in the past, and what is it that we're working towards today. And the last part of it, actually, there will be some slides on, at the very end, on the Khalistan movement, what Khalistan is, and what it actually means to all of us, some of us, or maybe possibly very few of us today. And from that, by the time we end off with the last part of the presentation, there's periods for question and answer. There will be opportunity for all that at the end. But if there's something that's pressing, if you raise your hand, I will stop and try to answer the question. Or if anyone in the Sangat has a better answer, they can also put up their hands and answer the question too. But I'll do my best to kind of do what I can.
What is it?
That should be KC version. I can do it from here?
No, I'll do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, stop.
We got the desktop hooked up.
Oh, seriously? Okay. Alright, you can go right to the next slide. So like I said, we'll be starting here. So I've kind of given you a personal background on myself. I've used this presentation at multiple camps over the last couple of weeks, actually, between Civic and at West Coast Camp and others. That this same presentation has kind of been kind of floating, and I kind of want to get an idea as we go through. Like I said, put your hands up if you have a question. You may not agree with much of what I say, and that's totally fine. You can talk to me afterwards, you can yell and scream at me afterwards, whatever you feel like in your hearts afterwards. In the course of the presentation, we'll try to move along as quickly as we can because I know we're already behind time. So I'll try to move it along as quickly as I can. So like I said, the first part, three parts, reflecting on 1984, the historical response, and defining justice will take us to the ultimate thing of how do you move this movement, and what is this movement to you? And if it's a spiritual movement versus a political movement, or it's a combination of both, by the end of it, I hope that you'll be able to just kind of define that to yourself. So in saying what we just talked about, like the revolution of the mind is something that's much more important than the revolution of like the physical being. So we want the mind focus when we actually start moving through this. So even in the case of when this movement started, let's say from 84, it's actually pre-84, but we're going to take it from 1984, that even with Baba Janal Singh, he's not afraid of physical death. It's the death of the conscience. It's the death of like the zamir that they're actually afraid of. So this is kind of central to the rest of the presentation, and that's why I wanted to bring it up at the front. That whether you like the one on the left because it looks funky, hip, and today, or you like the one on the right because that's actually more connected to you as an individual and as a Sikh, it doesn't matter. The issue here is how do you take what's in your mind and then apply it day to day. And it's something that you have, whether it's a spiritual journey, whether it's your own Simran, is how do you take your Simran, how do you take your Gurbani, how do you take your Akhand parts and Sahaj parts and Kirtan, and how do you actually benefit the world with them? That's the kind of the purpose of this entire presentation, is that if you are heavy on the spiritual side, how do you become heavy on the physical side? And if you're already heavy on the physical side, is that you have to understand that without that spiritual side, that you will start kesking at some point in your life, and a lot of us have personally experienced that. And we don't want the same thing to happen to the coming generation, so we want you to be kind of balanced as you go. And as we find that balance, we hope that you find that balance. So the first 6 or 7 slides are actually just pictures. And the reason that the reflection is that it's for you as individuals to take in each photograph and just kind of see the kind of attitude that Sikhs had or Khalsa had going into battle. And this is Madhu Jain and Sunny Shankar did 2 interviews with Baba Janal Singh and Singh's inside of Darbar Sahib, and they were even impressed. I had actually had a conversation with Sunny Shankar because we're trying to get pictures off of him. He has a lot of pictures that they haven't published yet, and we're trying to get all those pictures out. And their impression is that they were bloodthirsty animals pretty much inside. That's what Baba Janal Singh was. That's what like these Singhs were, the Singhs and Bana were. And when they met them, these are the scenes that they were capturing with them. That, they were carrying guns, wearing bullet rings, and they're playing volleyball in the streets. And you're talking a month before the Darbar Sahib's attack. Then you also have another side where you have Singhs of Baba Khalsa and Singhs of Akhand Kirtan Jatha still bhije hue, let's say, in Prem, in Ras, in Kirtan, as the attack approaches. Because a lot of the focus on the attack, and I'm not towards one Jathebandi or another Jathebandi or anything like that, but a lot of the focus goes on to central figures amongst the attack. And central figures in the attack, we usually look at General Subhaig Singh, Bhai Amrit Singh, Baba Jarnail Singh, and then at the same time there's a lot of other people. There were Singhs from Akhand Keating Jatha and Baba Khalsa, there were Singhs from the All India Sikh Students Federation. All of them in appearance look different. All of them had the same thing in their minds and the same vision as they were going forward. If you go to the next slide. And as you look at every picture that you're seeing is that there's inspiration behind the pictures. Is that this is something that was used by this year a lot after some writing that was put out on Let Them Come. It was a common term, that Orndo. And that was kind of a mentality when you think of that. If you actually think of that now, as in if you're sitting inside of the Darbar Sahib and there's an army approaching, and this hasn't happened once to us, this has happened multiple times throughout our history, whether it was this, or whether it was Baba Gurbaksh Singh Shaheed with 30 of his Singhs that stood ground, is the same thing is happening, but the question in their minds isn't that what's going to happen to us, the mentality is let them come. And because they're not worried about the destruction of the building, marble and gold and these things can be replaced, the building itself has been destroyed, we'll build it again. The thing is that the conscious level is that the moral, ethical stand of the Khalsa shouldn't be affected. And that was the purpose of this, was that whether we stayed inside or we left, we knew the attack was coming. And that was very apparent from General Sinha, who had actually said that replications of the Golden Temple of Harmandir Sahib had been made in the Chakrata Valley of Dehradun up in as early as 1981-82, and there's practice runs already happening. This attack was imminent. So whether we stayed or we left, the attack was happening. So when you say let them come on, though, it's almost like a mental state you have to be in already to, you know death is coming, this is death. But you already married death when you actually took Amrit, so this was acceptable. And when I was saying that there's a vast difference between the types of individuals that were inside, this is something that a lot of people haven't seen these images. And you look at the youthfulness of some of these things, and we don't know their names, I don't know who they are. But when these images start coming out, what you start looking at is that you have very young people, university level students, high school students that were inside, but they had this zeal to do something. And we're not going to call them as in they were just perfect human beings, and that's how they courted death. They definitely weren't perfect human beings. But that strive for perfection was inside them, that was inspired by the Guru. And that's something that each of us has inside of us. We may not be perfect. Every single day you dwell on your own doubts, you dwell on your own physical and mental failures, and those are acceptable. And I'm saying those are acceptable because if you actually capture them and you're actually working on correcting them, that is your entire life. Like your battle with the Panch gods is going to be your entire life. And not getting discouraged by it, but actually taking it as inspiration that every day is a battle. That nitya jang that you're supposed to be fighting is with yourself, and then using that inspiration to go and fight for others afterwards. And those that kind of talk about what is it that we actually saw in 1984, if the amount of army that was deployed and paramilitary forces that were deployed, this is just one street in Amritsar, and this is on the eve of the Darbar Sahib attack, and you have soldiers standing on every doorway. And when you say curfew is imposed, nobody's allowed out, literally nobody is allowed out. And if you have this much military that's actually in one city at that time, it's like full-scale destruction was the plan. It's like the nake that were put on around Amritsar to ensure that the band that they weren't coming to defend. Definitely, we don't know the numbers of even those that we lost in those. We barely know what happened inside because of the blackout. We definitely have no idea of how many people were actually murdered bend to bend. We have estimates of Operation Woodrose in the aftermath that 25,000 youth was wiped out within a matter of weeks to a month. And these are just things that we speculate. We speculate a lot because we actually don't have data. And these things are important. Like we can't go out back to the world and say that, in Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra says 25,000 Lawaris Lashan are found in these crematoriums. We actually barely have data. The only group that's actually collecting data right now is a group called Insaf that's actually doing it at an international level. And then what we have is an issue that we can't actually go out, because if you actually have one person to the next, what we find is one person will say 50,000 and another person will say 500,000. And we actually start arguing amongst each other. You could have a reporter standing somewhere, and I've had the same thing happen to me, where I've been questioned on how many Sikh youth were wiped out in the period between 1984 and 1995, and you have to think, as in we have no numbers. We don't have an actual definitive number. The definitive number will come when somebody actually collects the data. So if I say 50,000, I actually said something like 100,000, and somebody beside me got angry with me and said, no, it's 250,000. It's like these types of situations place us in a kind of a precarious situation where it's like we ourselves are confused. And that confusion is just not on numbers, it's actually on, we start questioning whether or not it was right for our Sanghs to be inside the Barsai when the attack happened. We start questioning the very being of the Khalsa. We start using terminology as in, well, if Babaji had left, or if the Sanghs inside hadn't been there, the attack wouldn't have happened, so much loss wouldn't have happened. But then we also start forgetting what is loss. We start defining things ourselves as in physical loss of life, physical loss of buildings, let's say wealth, even our reference library with manuscripts inside. All that is horrible, definitely. But ultimately, if the question was posed to you, and you never have to answer to somebody like me, but you will have to answer to yourself and to the Guru, is that all of that aside, to protect the ethical and moral values of the path that Guru Nanak laid and Guru Gobind Singh solidified, is that loss acceptable? And that's something to think about. Is that in the past we've had similar loss and we've come back stronger. Is that loss ever going to stop? Because one of the things that we should start thinking about is that in time, why is it that we are the ones that are consistently attacked throughout history? Why is it that the Sikh or the Khalsa is consistently attacked by every hukumat that comes? There's a simple reason for it, is that this is the reason you were made. The reason we were made was to stand, was to raise our voices under any cost. We can do that because we have Guru Asra and we have Gurbani with us. That almost forces us to act. We can't actually not stay quiet. If the individual that actually goes home, puts a rajai over their head and goes to sleep every night and turns a blind eye to every atrocity that's committed throughout society, whether it's gender violence, whether it's discrimination against race, whether it's religious discrimination or political discrimination, any of those things, if you turn a blind eye to it and just go to sleep at night, it's like you're not living, you're just not dying at the end of the day. And for us, it's a complete opposite. Any one of those situations, we've never backed off of anything. We stand, we speak, and it's only the one that speaks out is that comes out into the nazar or into the light of the hukumat or the government at the time. So we speak, therefore we're targeted. And we've been targeted historically every step of the way. From Guru Nanak speaking out against Babur, to Guru Arjan Dev Shahidi, to Guru Tegh Bahadur Sidi for the protection of religious rights, to Guru Gobind Singh's founding of the Khalsa Panth. It's like our Gurus themselves have shown us how to stand. And our Sikh Itihas shows us how our, let's say, back history from Banda Singh Bahadur up until now, they've shown us how to stand. So the question for us today is how do we stand in today's time, and what do we think is the right path? So just a couple more pictures in this topic. Bhai Menga Singh, and that's his mother actually with the Akhri Fateh after his Shahidi. Bhai Menga Singh actually, coming into Sikhi through Bhai Fauja Singh and Bhai Sukhdev Singh, was quite close with them. And at his Shahidi, it's like we don't really talk about, there's a lot of actually photographs of Bhai Menga Singh inside Baba Dal Tower. And at the bottom of the tower, and Singh standing around him after his Shahidi. And he actually ran for Shahidi. Like he climbed Baba Dal Tower. He was actually firing back at snipers, and he was the first Shaheed inside. And this picture actually just shows a very young man, actually. Bhai Menga Singh at his Shahidi was 24 years old. So it shows you that the people inside, while young, had true inspiration inside. Like that Jajba to actually that jung, fighting back, is that was inside them. So it wasn't the age, it was actually the advancement that they had through their Sangat and the people around them that actually inspired them through Guru-inspired principles to actually act. And I use this as a segue into the next topic because to me this is very important. Again, it comes back to that let them come on go type mentality. That it's actually very important to understand that when he says that when they do enter, they already know they're entering. So if Baba Janal Singh in his speech is already saying that when they enter, Jado Aonge, it's like they already know they're coming. So they have the option, but to them there is no option. The option is to fight. And the Akal Takht, the Akal Bunga, as it was referred to before, has been a structure that actually points this out to us, that is that we don't back down. majority of the Gurutam, we start looking at it from a religious aspect in like 21st century type mentality, as in it's a religious place. Blood shouldn't be spilled there. We shouldn't be fighting there. Fighting with each other is one thing. That's just how far we've deteriorated today. But fighting back against an oppressive regime that's actually coming to actually silence an entire community, of course it's justified. Of course that Asthan where Baba Deep Singh laid his head, Baba Gurbaksh Singh laid his head, of course it's justified. In our mentality is completely different. We do not need to conform to Western mentality as to what religion is, what spirituality is, and how we should live our way of life. These adopted nations that we've come to, we may respect the laws of the land, but it doesn't mean that the laws of the land have to actually drive out of you any type of Sikh psyche that actually refers to a Hatiyar Band Sangharsh. And I'll touch on that before I move on to the next point, which is that never should it be that in the Khalsa's mentality that you become so peace-loving that you're no longer able to lift a Hatiyar. This is something that is actually happening in my mind. I've traveled all across Europe, I've traveled all across the United States and Canada, where this common thing amongst those that are engaged in politics in these host countries are referring to as peace-loving people. And we are peace-loving people. We as Sikhs are peace-loving people. I have never heard an Irish, Canadian, white person say that they are peace-loving. It's automatically assumed that a white person, a Caucasian, for some reason, is peace-loving. And we as Dari Ke in this world today, based on whether you want to call it Islamophobia or post 9/11, is that we constantly have to say that we're peace-loving people. Obviously we are. But it's like what we have to think about is that don't become so peace-loving where it's like you can't even speak to the fact that we have a very martial tradition. We are allowed to carry weapons. We are allowed to use those weapons at the right time. And when that time comes, it shouldn't be that we are so now peace-loving and not actually engaged in that type of warfare that we actually can't fight back. And I'm not saying that somebody here today should do anything. Go and pick something up and do something. That's not the point. The point is to have in your mentality that at the time comes that this is always an option. It may be the very last option, but it's an option. So as we segue into the historical response, this history is something that most of you have probably read. The only reason I'm using it is because it kind of gives you a glimpse as, and when it's all presented together, it may hopefully make a little bit more sense as to how that trajectory has led up to 1984. How we actually go about and justify 1984, how we justify our position as Sikhs as 1984. So when we look at this shabd here, and I apologize for grammatical error because when it was actually copied and pasted, you see lagamatra have been moved around. When you actually read the shabd, Kal Kati Raje Kasai, Taram Pank Kar Udreya, Kud Amavas Sach Chandrama Dise Nahi Ke Chadya. This shabd actually is actually talking about, like underneath you can see the translation there. But this shabd actually has a response to it. This shabd is actually a question that when all this is happening and I can't find my path, what is it that I'm supposed to do? What should the people do now? So it's like, in the next mahalla, Maharaj actually gives an answer. The uttar is Kal ki ritu pargat chanan sansar. Right? And this is something that you may agree with me and you may not agree with me. It's totally fine, and we can talk about this in the aftermath. Is that my belief is that Gurbani, Simran, and Kirtan is something that strengthens you as an individual to act. It is not just in the moment, it is for you to carry on in the time period afterwards. So it's almost like grounding you, strengthening you, driving away the Panchvikar so you can actually act in a Guru-inspired, Khalsa-inspired way. Otherwise, honestly, don't take offense to this, what purpose would it serve? Unless it's a very selfish purpose of I want mukti for some reason. If you as an individual do a lot of kirtan, you do simran, and all you think it's for you, it's not for you. It's to strengthen you. It's to strengthen you and then go and act on others' behalf. To lift the downtrodden and the oppressed around the world, you need this to act. We will only act in accordance with Gurbani and the Guru if we actually have this, then we will act. So to me, I hope you didn't take any offense to just that comment, but the comment there is that if you're only doing it for yourself, start looking at everything that's happening around you, and you'll see where the Gurus themselves acted for others at all times and barely acted for themselves, never took their own personal welfare into account before they acted, is that that's where our inspiration comes from. That's what we're trying to live up to. And I'll try to move quickly through these slides. It's just a historical background. But when we see, like with Bhai Mani Singh, these Shahidis happen. Bhai Mani Singh's Shahidi happened in 1737. Masa Rangar takes over Darbar Sahib, and everyone knows the stories of Masa Rangar inside Darbar Sahib, where there's prostitution inside, there's gambling inside, there's drinking inside, all these things are happening. And within 2 to 3 years, Bhai Sukha Singh and Matab Singh enter Darbar Sahib, cut off Masa's head, and that is the response that's given for Masa's Beadbi of Darbar Sahib. In 1746, there's some interesting things that like I found when I was looking through. I never knew that the Shabd Guru was banned by Lakhpat Rai. Like he went so far after his brother had been killed by the Khalsa forces that he banned the term Guru. In the Shota Galukara, there was approximately 7,000 to 10,000 Sikhs that were killed on the spot. A further 3,000 to 5,000 were taken to Shahid Ganj in Lahore, and they were, as you can see, lined up and massacred there. But these things, like when we actually look at what happened in the aftermath, most of this is happening under, and I want you to keep this name in mind, Sardar Jassa Singh Ahluwalia. Just remember this name as we go through, and at the end, I just want to make a small point to it. Sardar Jassa Singh Ahluwalia leads Khalsa forces to reclaim Amritsar within 2 years, and they have a Sarbat Khalsa. So there's responses happening. After the desecration of Darbar Sahib and the destruction of it, within years we're responding in the way we know how. Next. This one's a very common image. When Abdali starts entering Punjab, there's multiple times where Darbar Sahib is attacked. And in this case, we have Baba Deep Singh immediately leads Singhs into battle with Abdali outside of Amritsar and lays down his life in its protection. Now this one, I'm fascinated with the Vadakalugara, and I've tried on many accounts to actually find historians and sit with them and kind of get an understanding of how this actually all happened. So I'll give you some of the things that I picked up. This is just a small account. When you look at Abdali invades and inflicts the Vadakalugara, he was so passionate, this Abdali was, about destruction of the Sikh Panth, that they covered in that period 200 kilometers in 48 hours with a caravan of over 100,000 soldiers. Which is like, I don't even know, most people think it's impossible. Jassa Singh Ahluwalia was trying to make it over to Haryana, where they had protection of like the terrain. He was being cut off along the way. He turned towards Patiala, where they had an ally that may have been able to reinforce them, but they were cut off before they could get there, and they were overtaken. So when this Kalukara happens, the thing to remember is that Kalukara only happens after the battle. We fight, and then if there's losses inflicted in mass numbers or during the fight, that's the Kalukara. It doesn't mean that we cried and whined and they killed us. That had never happened in our history. Never have we sat down and just laid our arms down. We fought. And even in the Vadakalukara, a ring was made around the caravan inside of the elderly, women and children that couldn't fight. And women themselves fought alongside the Singhs, and they fought. Every time the ring was broken, there was mass losses inflicted inside the ring. Then, once the ring was closed again, the battle continued until night fell, and then both sides retired pretty much. And in that, we lost half of our population. As historical belief is that 80 to 100,000 was the total population of the Sikh Panth at the time. And we lost half of our population in one day. And that would have been the lowest period in our entire history. Would have been that day. I don't think anything in our history comes even close to that. Aside from Chamkaur and Guru Gobind Singh being almost completely abandoned at that period. But that was a Guru. This is a Panth. We are maybe a Guru Roop, but we're not the Guru. If this is in our historical compulsion, is probably the worst moment in our history. And what happened in it? Within 6 to 8 months, Jassa Singh Ahluwalia leads Khalsa forces back, defeats Abdali at the Battle of Amritsar, and reclaims Amritsar again. There's none of this, what do we do now? Mar gaye, lot gaye, barbaad ho gaye. This mentality does not exist within the Sikh Panth. The Chardi Kala concept is, whatever happens, we move forward. So as you're seeing this like almost trajectory of how we're getting towards closer and closer to 84, there's things that happen for a reason. And it's strengthened us. We rely on these pieces of history to actually develop new history. This one is actually quite similar to actually June 84 in some aspects. When the call was made that they were going to destroy the Khalsa Panth altogether, Baba Gurbaksh Singh, at Sarbat Khalsa, the Sikh missiles actually left and said that, well, is it worth it in some ways? You would have to think about it. If a Sarbat Khalsa is held, and they're looking at what could possibly happen, and we're talking only 2 years after the Vataka Lukara here. We have very small population. You have to look at the dynamics of the Panth at the time, and think, why is it that the decision was made to leave, and not stand there with a full Fauj and try to fight? A full Fauj there might have been the complete destruction of at that time, of a majority of the Sikhs at that time, and would have put us in an even tougher situation. So the missiles made the decision in a Sarbat Khalsa, and these decisions are difficult. Like, you're going to do a Sarbat Khalsa this afternoon, and I've been a part of these Sarbat Khalsas as well, is that every individual brings their own mat, their own buddhi to the table. And when you sit at the table and you're looking around at all the Kaurs and Singhs with you at the table, it's like you put your agenda forward, and every single individual, and you can imagine the Missile Sardars putting their agendas forward, but they almost always were able to come to a consensus. Whether they liked it or not, they came to a consensus and they moved on. We can't do that right now. We within our own Jathebandis split on the smallest things. It's like something happens, let's just split up and make our own. Something happens in a Gurdwara, let's go make our own Gurdwara. The unity of the Panth is being destroyed because most of the models that were developed by our Bharatan Singhs have been abandoned. And we are not accountable to any of us. We can leave here, tomorrow somebody can get into a fight with the camp organizers and make Khalsa Camp Part 2. And it's happening right next door. Literally, that is what the mentality of the Panth is at the moment, is that we can do it better, we'll go do our own. And then when you get into situations like this, Baba Gurbaksh Singh took Agya and he said that 30 of us will stay. And then Arlo, that at least, and then actually engaging in the forces at the time, and most people know the story of they actually dressed up as like a wedding party, and they actually put on their best clothes, best dastara, and dressed up with hars around their necks, and they courted marriage, what they would call marriage, which is death, in that fashion. And this mentality is like, you can see that they're looking at the Vataka Lukara, they're looking at Sukha Singh, Matab Singh, they're looking at Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, they're looking at their itihas as well as they're responding. And they're 60 to 70 years out post-Guru Gobind Singh period, and they're responding in that manner because they're still reflecting on the same history that we're reflecting on today. And 1984, 1978 is our history of today that we should be reflecting on daily as to how do we respond. And that response doesn't have to be physical. The response, majority of the time, is mental. Is that if you can't be mentally broken down, is that that's what you want, is that you never should be silenced out of fear. Because if you are silenced out of fear, there's still something missing inside what you're trying to achieve. I'm going to fast forward. I'm not going to go into like the British period or anything. We're going to go right to 1978. And in this context, we had this happen. Now, a lot of people here may have actually come from some of the families of these Tera Singhs. Some maybe have very close associates that were associated with the Tera Singhs. I'm not going to go through what happened in 1978. It's pretty clear in most people's minds. But what you have to remember is that this sect of the Narakataris, they call themselves the Santa Nirankaris, this was actually something that was staged through the central government of India. These people did not exist in like a lot of force, nor did they have the backing of state agencies up until the mid-1970s when they became quite like active. Post-emergency period, there was an emergency that was laid by Indira Gandhi in 1975. The majority of her, let's say, campaign against her and protests against her were carried out by the Akalis and the Sikhs of Punjab, who put out morche almost weekly or daily, where thousands of people were courting arrest. Indira's eye towards Punjab started turning at that period. Now, Punjab has been subjugated to multiple issues. I'm not here to go through all of them, which could be the separation of Punjab in 1966, the violation of its rights in 1947, the violation of like riparian law, which is law of water. Whichever state water flows through has control over that state. That is actually applicable to every state in India except for the Punjab, where it's president's rule over riparian law, and that's why 50% of Punjab's water is diverted to Rajasthan and Haryana. So when you start looking individually at pieces of what happened to Punjab, why these agitations were happening, why we're battling the Sarkar, it's not just religious. There's a lot of political, civil, and human rights issues that were being violated at the time that led us to 1978. The division wanting to be created between the Khalsa Panth and Nirankaris were actually escalating violence. They were escalating confrontation. So when this took place, this was kind of like probably the nail in the coffin's head of what was going to happen now. So when we actually look at this situation, if you go to the next slide, there was a response given. And the response was pretty immediate within 2 years. We have Bhai Singh and Shahid Kabul Singh that actually went and killed Gurbachna right in the aftermath. Not just for the fact that Tera Singh Shahid in 78 were wounded in 1978, but also for the fact that the manipulation of Gurbani, the attacks on Guru Sahib, Gur Itihas and Gurmat, all those things were being propagated through a stooge of the government. If an individual wants to act with dialogue, if an individual is not something that's being put up by the state, we're more than happy to entertain dialogue and have discourse. But in situations where we're under physical attack, nobody attacked this individual. Bhai Fauja Singh didn't go in his protest to go and shoot Gurbachan. He went there to protest why this was actually happening in Amritsar. That this shouldn't be allowed, this procession should not be allowed to be carried out. They were attacked, we responded. That's how this happened. And when you see the next slide and the slide after, I want you to read something that I'll be putting up, and you'll understand why it is that we actually respond in this way. You look next slide. And then we get to 1984. So 1984 is something that everyone has their versions about, the 5 or 6 days of battle that occurred, the mass atrocities that were committed inside, from looting, rape, murder, and actually destruction of like historical artifacts and manuscripts. All those things happened. And we can leave it at that. All those things happened, we know those things happened. And then what is it that we're looking at here though? These three, I put these three pictures up, like I said, most of the attack is associated with these three individuals. And even they themselves, let's say, were quite young, especially the two on the side there, like they were in their mid-30s when this attack happened. So they did not actually, let's say were like 55, 60 years old, they have nothing to live for. They have small children of their own that are probably my age now. And they themselves gave up everything for this as well. So if you can go to the next slide. This response was very immediate. So when you look at, within 4 months, Indra is assassinated, and within a couple of years, Vaidya is assassinated, the general who led the attack on Darbar Sahib. And these pictures we see hanging everywhere, right? We commonly look at these individuals and we look at them very, very through a narrow lens of like, who were they? And if you look at how Bhai Jinda was, and you have photographs of Bhai Jinda when he actually went and killed Vaidya, and he was a Mona. He was non-Kiyastari. And he was non-Kiyastari throughout the years that he was in school, in university. He was non-Kiyastari in 1983 when he met Baba Jarnal Singh for the first time. He was non-Kiyastari actually when he shot the Deputy Commissioner of Police in front of the university he went to, because he was actually trying to, in drunken states, would come to the university and share puriyan there. And nobody actually barely knows about that itihas of Bhai Jinda. And he not only killed Vaidya, they also killed Lalit Makkan and Arjun Das, who were Congress leaders that led the 1984 genocide against Sikhs across Delhi. So they weren't so simple as in like they survived the movement, and even when they killed Vaidya, when they were actually arrested, this is the surup they went and gave Shahidi. So even when they operated in a mindset, which is fine, because you have an emotional response. The emotional responses were coming out. And whether it was like Harjinder Singh Pada, Deepa Hiranala, and there's all these individuals that exist within the Khalistan movement, and they existed in a way where there were, at many times, non-Kiyastari to operate. Now, from a physical aspect of revolution and guerrilla warfare, it can be something along the lines of, well, they tried. From a Sikhi aspect, yeah, definitely, like, you can't say that, there's a comparison between some of those individuals and people like Sukhdev Singh Babbar or Jathedar Ravinder Singh Babbar or Baba Jarnal Singh. Spiritually, it was a bit different. But what we look at is that in their Shahidi Swaroop, they actually wrote chittiyan out to the President of India. And I want to give you, the next slide. I want to give you just a small piece of what they wrote in one of their chittiyan. And if you can take like a minute of kind of just reading this, and kind of understand the very last line of what they're saying, and how it applies to Sikh history, and everything we looked at from a historical response perspective, and where we fall within this, is that there's no pleasure in these types of things that we do. These actions don't give us some type of pleasure that we're happy to take life. But it's put into the situation as like, what do we do? How do we fight back? And it's like when they're forced to fight back, it's like then you have incidents like this and acts like bravery like this for us that occur. And this thing from by Bhai Singh, by Garza Singh, by Shahbaz Singh, Sukhdev Singh, and if you look all throughout our history, when pairs have gone by Sukha Singh, Matav Singh, and even by Ranjit Singh, by Kawal Singh, and then you have by Bian Singh, Satwant Singh, and you have by Sukhan, by Jinda, it's like all of this is like leading us in the same trajectory. Is that when we actually get pushed into a corner, we do respond. And even there's a line by Kartar Singh Sraba, and it's a very interesting line actually, because we often have a different line today. We use this thing as in this, it's not the fight of the sword anymore, it's the fight of the pen today. And Kartar Singh Sraba, even though he ran a newspaper and he was very vocal during the Ghadar Party's movement in the early 1900s, his actual very first issue of the Ghadar that came out, on the front page was written that the time is soon coming when the pen will be dropped and the sword will be picked up and blood will be demanded for freedom. So it's like we have to think of as in we use every option available to us depending on what we think is the right tool to use at the time. And when the options are all exhausted, it's like we still have an option. It's like the main reason that I keep coming back to that point is that that option has to remain an option. Like sitting here today, and we also talk about, because the next couple of slides are actually going to go into like where we stand as a Panth today, and what type of justice are we actually pursuing. And once we kind of get through that, this Khalistan issue has to be brought up. It has to be brought up because it's something that the Panth actually decided on at one point. And it's like, why is it that we're turning towards softer versions of justice today? Why is it that we're not even using that term anymore? Why are we saying that replace that term, use a different term if you want to? Or why are we saying that it's not even needed, it's not even an issue in today's Punjab? And I want to touch on that before we finish up. I think we kind of covered this one. Go to the next one, please. Defining justice is something that's really interesting because it's like we define it as in this world as restorative and also as judicial. So we look to the courts, and we look to systems within India and Canada and the US and the UK to actually provide justice for us. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. As I speak, please feel free to read through this and kind of get an idea of why I'm talking to, this is a piece of judicial justice. So when we look at what is it that we're demanding? We're demanding justice from the Indian government, the Indian state, the law system, the Supreme Court of India, whatever you want to call it, we're demanding it from somebody or something. And if you can see what's kind of happened here, if there's 10 commissions and committees, we know they're all bogus. And when we say this is interesting. We say, oh, these committees and commissions aren't going to do anything, then why are we holding them? Why is so much effort put into committees and commissions then? Is it to show that we're not going to get justice? Is it just to show that this option is not available to us? And I'm not saying that's the answer or not the answer, but the question still stands is that why do we hold these committees and commissions or push for them only to say time and time again that they're bogus, they're corrupt? We weren't going to get anything out of that anyways. And then if you look at what they're telling us that at the bottom, if you look at that, 442 people convicted. This is actually from a report in April 2012 from Dauka, and they had spoken to Chief Justice within the Supreme Court system that 442 people have been convicted in regards to November 1984. Now, I can't tell you who those 442 people are, nor can I think many people tell you whether or not any of those individuals actually had anything to do with it, whether they were bystanders, whether they were pulled into mobs to actually lead anything. But what we do know is the actual perpetrators of the crime weren't convicted. The actual leaders of the Congress were not actually singled out or charged. Or if they were charged, let's call them bogus trials again, were run, and they were never convicted of any crime. And even lately, they kind of throw a couple pieces at us, like you have Moninder Yadav and you have Balwan Kokar that were actually sentenced last year. That sentencing was very mild, it was basically house arrest. One of them, I think it was Yadav, didn't even go to jail. So it's like when you look at these things, it's like, what are we actually pursuing? They're actually more than capable of telling the world that this many people died. 2,733 people were killed in Delhi. They give their numbers. They give, well, we're trying, we're pursuing justice, and we are actually doing things. it's like interesting because it's like on our side, it's like we're saying that we have nothing. And then when somebody turns around and says to us, well, 442 people were convicted, and it's like, most of us don't know. Most of us are still in that mindset as in we've gotten no justice. Because we actually, honestly, as we go to the next slide here, I don't think, understand what it is we want. And when we get into this, this is something that's almost like a reparational payment that's being provided. And I was actually enlightened even further. In June, I was at a WSO event, a World Civic Organization event in Calgary, and had an opportunity just to kind of meet briefly with Colin Gonzalez, an advocate attorney from India, that Warpreet Singh and others were there as well. And he enlightened me further as to how this process works, because he was actually involved in this. And it's shocking as to like how distant we are from actually what actually happens to us. So we have this, and you probably read this now as I've been talking, but you have this. Out of 1,551 cases, you had a reparational payment of 27.78 crore rupiah, approximately $7 million Canadian. That payment, I had broken it down in one way, saying that that is roughly about 2 lakh rupiah per family in India's economy. So each family was given 2 lakh rupiah. And then I had made an emotional plea to the Sangat there as well, and I'll do the same one to you, that who in this room would actually sell their father's dastar in a Punjab Thana, or like their sister's izzat or their chunni for like 2 lakh rupiah, and who would send a 15-year-old boy to school only to find their dead body in a canal at the end of the day, and you're given 2 lakh rupiah but no police officer is charged, no extrajudicial murder charges, or any state agency that's held responsible, but you're given 2 lakh rupiah, which barely translates to a few $1,000s Canadian. Is that justice? So if it's not justice, then it's like, well, what is it that you want? Right? So these questions start coming up, and then he actually, Colin actually broke that down even further, and it made it actually even worse. So we have 2 lakh rupiah that's given to each family for the loss of their loved one. They had filed a plea saying that another human rights violation committed amongst this is the bodies weren't returned. So if the bodies weren't returned, you should give further payment for the bodies not being returned. And to that, the judge agreed and issued 1.75 lakh for the bodies not being returned. That payment then was told that it should come out of the 2 lakh. That it's not additional, it's a part of that 2 lakh. Which actually makes it even worse, because that means that for a dead body being returned to a family, you're getting 1.75 lakh. That means the living human being that was murdered, their value is 75,000 rupees, 75,000 rupees. Huh? So it's like, this is the value of a Sikh youth life in Punjab during that period. And the amount of bounties that were carried out by Punjab police, who are acting agents of the Indian government, is through the roof. And that's a completely different topic as to how these people, even in Punjab, were coerced to kill their own, and at what level they actually carried out tens of thousands of fake encounters just for the fact that they were getting promotions and money and liquor pretty much at the end of the day to carry them out. So this piece of justice is it truly justice? So as you read this, I kind of want to point something out. We do this in Canada a lot as well, and I'm sure it happens in the UK, not so much in the US. But we love apologies, apparently. Apologies in the middle of Parliament, where people apologize to us for the Komagara Maru incident, or people will apologize for any type of atrocity that was committed upon our community. So if you have somebody like a psychopath like Moninder Modi, who's taken over India now, and if this guy stood in the middle of the Parliament and first announced that every single politician, police officer, state agency or agent that was actually responsible for mass murder, rape, and looting of the Sikh people was thrown in jail. Let's say they were hanged. He hung all of them, let's just say. It's a fairy tale anyway, so let's just go as far as we can. He hangs all of them. Then he turns around, goes into Parliament, and folds his hands and says to the Sikh Qawm that we're very sorry for everything we did. It'll never happen again. Justice has been served. Go home. So, after 30 years of this pillaging and plundering, is that justice? Is that enough? These are questions to ask yourself, is that where does this end? In today's Hindustan, and I'm not calling it India, I'll refer to it as in today's Hindustan, are we acceptable minorities that will not be assimilated in the long run? And that's a question to ask yourselves, is that if that is a real possibility in your minds that we will be assimilated, or there's an actual assimilation process going on, even to the degree of look at your ducts, look at the hukums that are coming down from the Adal duct, who are the karmcharis now that are involved in running Panthik affairs, is that where is this all coming from? As long as the central government of India's hands are in our pots, our hands are in our business, hands are in the way we run our affairs, is that can we truly aspire to be the Khalsa that Guru Gobind Singh created? Or will we constantly be meddling over the same issues that we've been fighting with each other for 50 years? So that's something that's more of an internal question than something that you need to answer to me. It's something that I've been trying to answer to myself, so I cannot expect an answer from anybody else. But it is something that we have to start questioning now, is that where do we draw the line? Where is this going to end for us? So this is the last part of this portion of the presentation, and it's like moving the movement. So I'm going to concentrate on Khalistan actually, because I can't go into every single aspect of what's happening. The human rights movements, civil rights movements, there's tons of different movements that are happening. They're all Satyar Yoga at the end of the day, and they're all areas that we need help in. And wherever you physically place your body to help in, just do it with tan, man and tan at the end of the day, and we'll be successful. This movement, as it's also the same quote as on the back of my shirt actually, but this movement is seeking this. And when we say Khalistan, this is what I seek. I don't seek a theocracy, I don't seek a religious state, I don't seek where something that's actually going to happen where everyone is going to be Amritari overnight. I also know that it won't be a utopia, it's not going to be a paradise that was like the Garden of Eden or anything like that. I know all these things are out the window. I know for a fact that whatever determination we have, and those of you that sit with me today in the discussion afterwards, we're going to be touching on our own versions of Khalsa Raj and what does it mean to us. And then in that discussion group we'll be able to see that we have 20 different opinions amongst 20 different individuals, from spiritual Raj to physical Raj. Where do we actually start, like, are all our lines that are like diverging, where do they actually connect? Because we'll all have different opinions. But for me, it wasn't as simple as saying that we're just going to carve out this one piece of territory, and then we're going to sit there and have parathe and jalebi, and we're going to be totally fine for the rest of our lives, and that's it, we're done. The Khalsa's mission, it was actually supposed to start once we have a base. The same reason Baba Banda Singh created a base was the same reason that we wanted to have a base. And Khalistan is that base to actually export revolution throughout the world. And that's what we want from Khalistan. We don't want Khalistan to turn into an imperialist state. We don't want it to turn into like a capitalist state. We have to look to the Guru Granth Sahib to actually define what type of political system works for the Khalsa Panth. And the Panj will always be essential, but we'll get into that the next. So when we talk about like these movements that are happening around Khalistan, and I'm going to try to define one version of it. I actually took the slide out, but I'm going to use it anyways, and I might go a bit over time so you can deal with it. I want to define one thing too, and it's not the right definition. It's not something that all of you are going to agree with, or any of you are going to agree with. But then I'll tell you why we've been putting things like this out recently. So I have, with some of my friends and some of the colleagues that I work with, we developed Khalistan version 1.0. And we were jokingly actually one night sitting around talking about like versions of Khalistan and all these things. So we actually came up with one sitting around, and then we actually worked on it a little bit more, and we're like, this would be interesting to present to some circles and see their reactions. Because people don't talk about Khalistan. And if they do talk about Khalistan, they talk very surface. They don't get into the nitty-gritty of what it actually is when you actually create it. Now what do you do? Because let's say a land is given to you, right? And you actually, or you've taken it. I prefer taking it. Let's say we've taken our land back. So we take this land back, now what do? So first question is, and when you start thinking about Khalistan or you start thinking about independence, is that would you hold elections? Because if you hold elections, you know the state of Punjab right now, and you know a bottle of booze can buy a vote. So will you engage in that type of politics? And will you allow people to vote? If you don't allow them to vote, then what type of society are you creating? Especially within the Western world, who sees democracy as this bastion of light from heaven, pretty much. So if you don't have a democracy where you're allowing people to vote, then what do you propose? So we actually came out and we just said that, let's for fun say that we're going to have a city-state. Khalistan will be just 2 square miles around the Darbar Sahib complex. We literally just took the Vatican's model and we're like, let's see if this would work in Amritsar. that Vatican City or Amritsar City, just like 2 square miles around the Darbar Sahib complex, that's Khalistan. And the rest of Punjab is Punjab. And they have this symbiotic relationship where they work with each other and they deal with each other, but we can't take the voting right away from citizens. It's not the right thing to do. That was one version. We also had like a second version, which was like a social dictatorship, which was like kind of crazy. And we had just a full-on democracy, which also was crazy, because we couldn't figure out how we would actually fulfill the Khalsa's mission in a full democracy where people aren't ready to actually have that mentality to work towards it. So we had to actually start thinking as in like what, so we took the first model and we took it as a city-state. Punjab would be democratic, it would actually exist in a democratic fashion, elections would be held every 4 years, same process that a lot of our host countries that we live in have. And Khalistan actually would just be this area. It would be controlled in a way through the initiation of Sarbat Khalsa, a sub-jatedar system that would be created across the world where Canada would have 10, US would have 10, UK would have 10, Malaysia would have 5. They would congregate at the Darbar Sahib complex every 3 months on a quarterly basis to review Panthik issues, blah, 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 blah. So we had this whole process mapped out. And we're like, this could work. They have control over all Gurdwara, they have this, that, and the other, they have funding systems, they can tax people within that 2 square kilometer radius and they'd actually hold those taxes for the year. Khalistan would have its own army, like the Swiss Guard is the army of Vatican. We went through this whole thing. And when we presented, the interesting thing is, anybody who is a part of the Khalistan movement or was a part of the Khalistan movement is vehemently against it. They hate it. Anybody who was against the Khalistan movement loves it. They're like, this is perfect. So it's very interesting to see a dynamic as in like why one side who was so for the Khalistan movement, because there's a complete different definition of the Khalistan movement at the time. And when I say redefining Khalistan or reclaiming this term Khalistan, is that we're working with these organizations here. We're working within solidarity groups with Tamils right now and Kashmiris and Dalits to have a solidarity front that's actually being created against India. We've also started joining groups that are actually on a global solidarity front, like Palestinians and Aboriginals, to kind of present our models there as well. So we're taking a different approach. We're taking the approach that we need to actually physically engage in other movements to support our own movement and kind of show where we align. But when we present our model of Khalistan, is like what I found is, and the reason I'm telling you this is that when I presented the model, it was the only time I had actual real discourse with people. People that hate it are then forced to create their own version, or they're forced to tell you their version. Because how would having that conversation, no, I don't like it. What don't you like about it? I don't like these things. Well, how would you propose changing that? You actually get into a real dialogue. Not just surface dialogue or fairy tales of what we'll actually do, but actual real dialogue. And that's what we want to do with so-called Jathebandiyan that actually support the idea of Khalistan, is actually we need to have these discussions. Because once you actually get past the surface level, it gets very ugly very quickly, if we're not careful. So I wanted to show some examples of groups within Canada, the US, and UK. Just some of them that are actually political activist groups, not just like charities or working for the betterment of the Panth. There's tons of those as well. I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be on this list. This is just a small list of groups that I've come across, and we're not talking about groups like SOPW, Sikh Relief, Khalsa Aid, other groups that are actually doing different types of work. It's not necessarily political activism straight on, one way or the other. And when I'm speaking to political activism or activism inspired by 1984, what I'm mainly saying with these groups is either it's grassroots within the Sikh community, building solidarity groups and working with other communities, or it's working at another level, which is working within political systems of the countries of like Canada, US, and UK, where they're actually out there amongst lobbying politicians and getting work done in that way. So these are some of the groups that actually already exist. Now, I wanted to comment on something, is that like there's very individual, as an individual, what can you do, right? We start thinking about things as in like we as individuals, we need groups, we need people, we need this, that, and the other. This is not to toot my own horn, but it's going to happen anyways, regardless, because this was a project that I had done. So I wanted to kind of highlight this, to kind of show that as an individual, what can you do? I had no funding from Gurdwara, I had no funding from an organization, I didn't put an organization's name to this project. It was simply called We Are the Light. And that's it. And then we had youth across the country that helped in Canada. And we have a museum that's opening on September 19th, 2014. It's an international-based museum, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. and stories everywhere from the Jewish community, the Holocaust, Armenian genocide, the Palestinian plight. All those stories are captured in Surrey, including the Kashmiris. And after almost 5 years of work, was able to establish a 1984 and Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalsa segment to that museum. So we have our own exhibit within the museum that actually covers the story of 1984 and Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalsa. Bhai Khalsa's picture actually will be hanging in the museum as a human rights defender that lost his life while protecting the rights of the people of Punjab. So it's like, as an individual, there's a lot you can do. And you don't always need a lot of money. You don't always need organizations backing you. This was almost done single-handedly with the help of about 3 people. And it took a lot of time and effort, definitely. It took a lot of political maneuvering, definitely. But at the end of the day, it was accomplished. And for us, it's something that isn't like, you know, what we're doing is we're trying to institute terms in the museum. And why is it important? Because it's like when we're talking right now, we don't want Punjab police mentioned, we want Indian state mentioned. It's small things that you have to use in there. Punjab police was just a tool. It's the Indian state's policy that drove things. And then we want things like genocide used. We're still working on getting the term genocide used within the museum, then it becomes a reference point for the rest of the world to say that an international museum, a Canadian museum, is using the term genocide for what happened with Sikhs in 1984. So it's like we start looking at what are ways that we can actually progress. And this is something that you know, we kind of were successful with. So when you look at all these groups, this is just one example, small example of what all these groups were doing as well. And they have their own work going on. Then you have individuals that are out there doing prachar. But what I'm trying to now make you focus on is that where you as an individual do anything, is that you have to remember between the spiritual and physical balance, it's you who makes the decision as to what you do. If you actually take all the spirituality that you're gaining by going to camps, discussion groups, Grand Savai Kirtans, darbars, it's like, what are you actually doing with it? So the question comes back to you as an individual. You may be a very good individual when it comes to your own personal that, but how is your personal that or your spirituality helping the world? That's a question that you should also take back to yourselves, is that you want to be that individual where you have all those front level things, where you have all those things that make you into this individual that's Guru inspired and Khalsa inspired, but then how do you take that inspiration and drive it home in the physical world today? Where are you actually accomplishing that? And that's something that we all have to ask ourselves on a day-to-day basis. It's not to actually feel deterred, it's to feel inspired. Because the list of shaheeds is endless, the list of like Kaatname that our Guru Sahibans did is endless, and it's like to be a part of that Qafila moving forward, a part of that caravan, is that we also have to act and behave in the same manner. So some of these things that we're talking about is that you yourself will have to kind of decide where you stand with that. So there's only a few more slides. So when I talked about this comment here, establishment of Khalsa would be to spread the message of equality to all peoples of the world, exporting revolution to the entire world once base is established for this purpose. Sounds like nice and fun, but I'm using a term exporting revolution. It's most closely aligned with actually the Cuban Revolution. It's a communist revolution, but that doesn't mean everything they did was right or wrong. It just means that they had an interesting term that they used. I don't think this is something that's new to Sikhi at all. I think actually we've actually been like the bearers of this since the beginning. Is that our revolution was never about an internal revolution. It was actually about a revolution of the mind that would be carried out in the physical by Guru Nanak as he spread the message everywhere, and then by the Guru Sahibans afterwards. So this is nothing new to us. It's just reshaping it in our minds when we actually look at something like Khalistan as what would it be. And when I talked about it before, in my mind, Khalistan is not something that's just something that's there and then we're secure and safe and we forget about everyone else. Now I'll give you an example and then I'll move on. And I can only give you one example because I know we're short on time. The example is actually of Angola and Cuba. Angola was fighting for independence. Cuba sent 30,000 troops to Angola. And this is how you have to start thinking of what would Khalistan's purpose be, right? Cuba sent 30,000 troops to Angola to support the Angolan revolution to kick out like, pretty much colonialism. So Angola gains victory, right? Fidel Castro makes a speech in the United Nations talking about moral and ethical victory, and the day that victory is declared and a government is placed in, he removes all 30,000 troops back to Cuba. And the speech he does in the United Nations is that the United States or no Western power could do this, because Cuba is a nation that's based off of moral and ethical principle. We have no, like thought of imperialism. We're not going to put up McDonald's everywhere. We're not going to go there and make these people something they're not. Our job as brothers in humanity was to go and do this, was to free them. And we've done that because we ourselves were the enslaved ones. We were the downtrodden ones. And now it's our job to go and help. Right? How successful they were doesn't matter. Whether they failed 30 missions, the fact is that they had missions and they actually went to go do something. We failed many times in our history too, but we start seeing failure as physical. It's not physical. Failure is not represented as like a physical loss. Our loss is not in Shahidi. Like Guru Arjan Dev Ji's Shahidi wasn't a victory for Jahangir, it was a victory for us. That was our fateh. Guru Tegh Bahadur Shahidi was our fateh. The Chote Sahibzade was our fateh. Baba Banda Singh Bahadur was our fateh. Every step in history was our fateh because we stood. We didn't back down from ethical and moral purpose, we won. So in the same sense as like when you look at this version of Khalistan, and some of the things that are just written up here, it's like you're in a constant state of revolution. You're in a constant state of like permanent revolution. We know there will be corruption. We as individuals are corrupt. So how can we expect a country to be perfect where we have 20, 30 million people living? There will be corruption. But our thing is that how accountable are we? How accountable are we going to make leadership and actually organizations and government? It's all up to you as an individual. Like Khalistan is not something that people should shy away from because they think that this thing bad could happen, that bad could happen, that bad could happen. What could happen shouldn't deter you from creating something that actually could have purpose. And on the front end, when you self-load yourself to a point, front-load yourself to a point where it's like nothing but bad things could happen in Khalistan because we're not ready, is that as a population, you may never be ready. How do you get 20, 30 million people to be ready? Most movements and revolutions are run with like 5% of the population. Our 5% are active. We have active percentages within our population. It's just that there's no coordination or unity yet. And that unity doesn't have to be, we all have to be like one jathebandi, one group. No, it just has to figure out a way of how do we communicate on a regular basis and how do we make decisions collectively. And we haven't made that effort. In the last 30 years or so, when is the last time we as a Panth have made an effort to actually collect ourselves and make decisions, or even see if we can make them? So there's like 2 more slides here. When I talk about reclaiming Khalistan, when I say grassroots movement, the rebranding of Khalistan to the population is just that. The things that we talked about Khalistan today, hopefully it wasn't scary to anyone. Hopefully it's not something that you don't see as being separate from Sikhi even. It's actually very connected to the idea of Sikhi. And whether you, even when we talk about it in the discussion group, whoever I get to sit in with, we will talk about things like, even Bhai Rantir things around Halemi Raj, and we'll talk about things like Khalsa Raj, we'll talk about things of spiritual Raj. We'll talk about everything. Because everyone has a concept. It was like a 20-person discussion with Buddha Dal Nahang things around 96 crore Fauj returning. And even though I don't believe in that at all, I don't believe in the way that some people believe in it. I don't believe that anyone is going to come to be my savior at the end of the day. The Guru is my savior and the Guru is Angsang and Shabd Guru all the time. I don't need individuals to come back for me. And when in my history has somebody ever come back? If nobody came back during the Vatakalukara, we should be damn sure nobody's going to come back today. This act of complacency on the part of many that somebody's coming back, it needs to be challenged. And it's not the fact that we're actually fighting with one another, but we need to challenge the mindset that we need somebody more than Guru Sahib to actually accomplish something in life. That is something that needs to be challenged. Go to the next one. So this is the last slide. I'm just going to leave this up. Within the Khalistan movement today, and I call it a movement because it's a very active movement, and whether or not we agree with each other or the principles or what it is or anything, that we will come to terms with ourselves in the future. But where you see people speaking to Khalistan and you don't agree with what they're saying, that's totally fine. But when you don't agree with the overall concept or the idea of it, that even is totally fine to me. I have no problem with people not even agreeing with it. Because people will have other ideas that we need to strengthen the Khalsa, we need to strengthen Punjab first, we need to do this, we need to do that. And we've had many discussions around this. I'm going to say one last thing here. And whether or not people believe this to be a true Sarbat Khalsa or people weren't invited and all those such things, it doesn't matter. This is the last one we recognize as a Sarbat Khalsa, as a Panth, because it's the last time we got together in such large numbers. So that's the main point, is that people didn't show up because of their own egos, that's fine. But there was a declaration made there, and we stand by the name Khalistan for, in my opinion, for 2 reasons. and I just want to touch on this before I end, is that Khalistan was not made by me, you, or anybody else standing here. Khalistan was something that was derived actually back in the 1930s first, but it was coined here in a gathering of the Khalsa. And I don't have the right as an individual to say that let's change it. Even if I did, I have a bigger problem with that. Is that who is the Indian government or Western media to say that Khalistan is the dagi term, it's a bad term? If I believe it's a bad term, that's different. If the Panth believes it's not the right term, that's different too. But why would I bow under pressure that Khalistan is a dagi term? Tomorrow they'll take Punjab and say Punjab is associated with Gudimar, the killing of young innocent girls that are born, it's associated with drunkenness, drug epidemics. That's what Punjab is. Then we'll have to change Punjab. These are our terms. We need to reclaim the terminology. It's a lot of work and it's difficult. But those that are actually walking that path, don't block that path. Let them walk that path. If I'm walking that path, you have a parallel movement beside me. I should recognize you as a parallel movement and hope for your fateh in that movement, and you should hope for my fateh. As long as we're communicating with one another and we're not adversaries. I don't need to go out and say that human rights movements are completely useless, we should focus just on political rights. You have to see connections amongst everything that's happening around you. Whether it's a religious, dharmic movement, whether it's a political movement, a civil rights movement, or a human rights movement. Any one of those things that you decide to go into, one thing you have to be clear on is that you are still brothers and sisters in the movement. We're all bound by the same thing, which is Guru Sahib. So when you actually take it to that level, it's much clearer in your eyes as to what you're fighting for. I'm not your adversary. I believe in many of the same things as you do. My Nitne might not be the same as yours, my Amrit Vela might not be the same as yours. But at the end of the day, the betterment of the Panth and Sikhi in the world and the Prafulita of Guru Sahib's mission is what I'm looking for, and I hope that's the same as you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.